evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start our council meeting, I'm just going to make a few comments. In the very recent past, we have been made aware that one of our schools in our municipality, Westmeath Public, has been chosen to be closed. And we are very disheartened because of that. Taking a school away from a small community really does take the heart of the community away. The health of a community is education, health, and income. And when we remove education, we have a lot of trouble with health and income. And so the school parents and other people are organizing to bring a case to the Renfrew County School Board, and they're looking for support from all of Whitewater Region, which I'm sure we can afford them, because we almost lost Opeongo High School this year, and with some fighting we got to keep it. But if we don't keep pushing, we will lose more schools. Losing more schools means that it's going to be harder to work with our economic development, because if you want to bring people into a small community with no school, that's extraordinarily difficult to do. And so we, this council, have been pushing economic development. That's part of our mandate. And it's definitely one of our biggest interests. And so we're asking if you can support the Westmeath School as part of Whitewater Region, and there's a committee that have got together, and they're forming, I believe, an association which will be going up and going in the next couple of days, and they will have a web page. What? SOS Westmeath, 110 years old and gorgeous. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that forward. Having said that, call the meeting to order. March 2nd at 6:04. Any disclosure of pecuniary interests? Seeing none. Moved by Darrell McLaughlin, seconded by Terry Miller. Be it resolved that the council in committee of the Township of Whitewater Region adopts the agenda of the March 2nd, 2016 meeting. All those in favor? All those opposed, if any? Councillor McLaughlin.
I think there was one error that I had brought to your attention.
Go ahead. That was
item 8, the Chair of Recreation and Culture. So with a change there, because I think it's Councillor Olmsted.
Okay, we will set that in place, yeah. So that changes to Chris Olmsted. So all those in favor? Carried. Now I will call on the Chair of Public Works, Dave Mackay. He's going to stay in the chair he's sitting in, and he will bring forward the delegation.
Okay, we have a delegation from Pipeline Energy East Pipeline, John Pritchard and Robert Muir. Here? Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
I don't know, but I couldn't hear Councillor Mackay. I don't know if he had his mic on.
I did. Can you hear it?
Did you? Okay.
Do you want me to repeat it?
Yep.
Okay, this is a delegation from Energy East Pipeline, John Pritchard and Robert Muir.
Perfect. And can you hear me?
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having us back here. I think the last time we were here was in April. And so a few updates for the project is kind of the main point of this. Make sure you have all your questions answered and kind of give you an update of what we've been doing the last year and kind of what our next steps are as well. First, I'm sure you've seen this slide before, but TransCanada is who's putting on Energy East, the pipeline that goes from Alberta to New Brunswick. We're known for our natural gas pipeline systems, but we also have oil pipelines, wind power, largest private sector power generator, as well as, like I said, our Keystone system with oil pipelines. So we're known for energy. We've been in the business for the last 60 years, and we're a little less known out in the east than we are in the west, and so this is a good just to give you an idea of what we operate in. One of the big questions we get with Energy East is about oil. With prices going down and with the renewables on the rise, is Energy East, is this still useful and still needed? And the answer is yes. This is a study that was done by the International Energy Agency, looking at different fuel mixes currently in 2013, and then looking at 2040. And so you can see the growth on some of the fossil fuels are definitely less, while the renewables and nuclear and bioenergy is going up. But there's definitely still a need and demand for oil products that we use in Canada every day. And so that's why projects like Energy East, like this, are still needed and still useful. As far as the project, to give everyone an update for those that like a refresher, this is a oil pipeline with two different parts. The blue line represents converting an existing natural gas mainline that's currently in the ground between the Saskatchewan-Alberta border and then just west of Cornwall. And then new construction on either side. The green line represents new build of a 42-inch pipeline. So the total length is 4,600 kilometers. About 3,000 of that is converting an existing pipeline. The total capacity is 1.1 million barrels per day. For jobs, it'll be about 14,000 jobs during development and construction of the project, additional 55 billion GDP to the economy, and about $10 billion in additional taxes from infrastructure that'll be built along the pipeline route as well. As far as the timeline, in October of 2014 is when we officially applied this project to the National Energy Board. That's the regulatory body that has oversight into the project. They'll be holding their hearings and reviewing, making sure that it's in the interest of Canada before they give their recommendation to the federal government, who has the final say if it's approved or not. Since we initially filed 2 years ago, but basically, there's been some changes. In 2015, we removed our deepwater port in Cacouna, Quebec, due to beluga whale concerns, which put the application on hold until we had a new route figured out. So the NEB said, come back with a completed route before we'll start to look at it, and before we'll start doing our regulatory process to make sure that it's safe and that it's approved. This last December is when we filed one of our fourth supplemental filing with the new route information and what we believe to be a completed application. So that, like I said, that includes the finalized route of the project. It includes the pump station locations, as well as the valve siting methodologies and locations as well. So right now what's happening is the National Energy Board is reviewing, it's a 40,000-page application, so it's a very large application. We're hoping that sometime in the beginning part of this year, in quarter 1 or quarter 2, they'll accept that as a complete application, and then what happens then is they have, it used to be 15 months to review the project. With the new federal government, they've added 7 months of regulatory time to that, and then another 3 months to the federal government time. So in all, it'd be about 2 years of review from the National Energy Board, where they'll hold their own public hearings, they'll hold their own meetings, making sure that we've done our work, and making sure that the communities and the provinces we go through have their questions answered as well. Once they give their hopefully final approval, it then goes to the federal government, and they have 5 months to deliberate and say if it gets approved or not to be built. Assuming everything goes well, we're hoping to be beginning construction in 2018, and so still a ways away from that. There's still lots of time to get involved and to make sure that you have questions answered, and then in service in 2021. And so definitely a long picture range here, but that gives you an update of where we're at right now. One of the things that people also ask as well is, with the oil price going down, if Energy East isn't built, will it keep the fossil fuels in the ground? Will it keep the oil coming from Alberta and out west in the ground? And that's not the case. This is a study predicting oil by rail through Ontario to double by 2024 without infrastructure pipelines in the ground today. Right now, there's not that major infrastructure to get it. Trains have taken on the bulk of that workload. We've seen a lot of different terminals being built for rail transport for oil, and that's expected to continue, especially with no new pipeline structures built. The oil sands and the other oil producers in the West, they'll still get their product to market. It'll just be by truck and by train without pipeline capacity available. Last year, the Ontario Energy Board submitted a report and did studies on Energy East, and I'd like to point out a few of the different concerns they had. One of them was about greenhouse gas emissions, and this is where kind of what I just talked about, saying that a large portion of the pipeline capacity has already been deemed, is already being invested in and used by the oil sands. So as a result, the project's approval at Energy East does not affect production of these. It's already in the works to extract it out of the ground. All it does is simply change the mode of transport from trucks and trains to pipeline instead. Emissions actually drop due to Energy East because you're not using trains and everything else. It's an emissionless system once it gets in the pipeline system. The 1.1 million barrels a day replaces about 1,500 trains on the tracks every day, going back and forth from Alberta to refiners in the east. One of the other questions the Ontario Energy Board highlighted was natural gas supply and pricing. Is if we're converting or taking one of our natural gas lines out of commission for natural gas, will that affect price or supply? And that's also been solved. We have an agreement with all the local distribution companies, so the Enbridges, the Union, the Gas Metros, saying that there's still plenty of product in place, and it won't affect supply or price at all. One of the reasons for that is our systems used to export heavily to the States for natural gas, but with new gas formations being found in the U.S., that export market is no longer there. So our systems are going the other way, where we have excess capacity because that market's no longer there in the U.S. And the last one is pipeline safety and natural environment, and I'll talk about that as far as valve siting and everything else and how we react to that. The bottom line is we are in the business of delivering energy safely. We've been around for 60 years. It's something we do very well. We're committed to the environment, to making sure that we protect it, making sure that we do the studies, and so our projects don't affect the environment. World-class integrity. We spend about $1 billion each year on maintenance and integrity programs, making sure that pipelines are safe. It's not something we put in the ground and then leave it. We spend considerable time and effort making sure it operates safely every day. One of the things we do is we monitor it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from our control center in Calgary. And they can tell, the temperature, they can tell exactly where every drop of oil is at every time. And those systems are in place to make sure that if anything were to happen, our first reaction is to shut it down. We'd rather shut it down and go investigate and make, before we realize it's something, than wait and find out and then shut it down. We're very cautious when it comes to that. It definitely is in our best interest to shut it down and then investigate versus the other way around. And then the last thing is ready to respond. We conduct emergency exercises every year along the entire route for our natural gas system and our oil system, and this will be the same thing with that. And there'll also be jobs along the route with emergency response, with contractors and everything else, making sure that we are in a position to respond very quickly in the unlikely event of an emergency ever happening. So like I said, some of the safety measures we do to protect pipelines, the entire system is protected by cathodic protection. So using sacrificial anodes that will rust and take that corrosion from being in the ground versus the pipeline. All of our pipeline is coated with an abrasion-resistant coating to prevent it from getting scratched or damaged places where rust and corrosion can start to occur. Making sure that it's depth of cover, and so farming equipment, other things won't strike the pipeline. Every weld on the pipeline is X-ray inspected. There's no acceptable failure rate. If there's any flaws or damage, it's in the 90th percentile. If there's anything, we'll cut it out and replace it with a new proper weld, as well as using high-quality steel and inline inspections. We have tools that can go through the pipeline that can measure for dents, corrosion, scratches, anything like that, and that's more of a new technology, making pipelines safer every day. Additional safety measures in specific around sensitive areas such as water crossings, water intakes, railways, roads, populated areas. We'll use a heavier wall pipe. We use HDD or horizontal directional drilling at appropriate water crossings, strategically placing valves to reduce potential outflow volumes, and I'll talk about that more in detail later on. That's one of the new developments we have with the final valve sites. Developing and practicing emergency response plans, and that's something that we're starting to gear up on that, and I'll talk about that later on as well. Regular aerial patrols along the entire route. It's no more than 2 weeks. A helicopter flies the entire length of the pipeline in sections, making sure that there's no unauthorized activity on it. One of the biggest cause of incidents is third-party strikes. People don't know it's there, so they dig into it or hit it. And so that's what those are for. Our helicopter pilots are also trained to recognize, changes in environment. If it's slumping or if there's something that could cause an impact, they're aware of that before it happens. And then, like I mentioned before, our monitoring from our control center in Calgary. So one of the big changes, or one of the big, additions we can talk about now is valves. Valves are placed. Every pump station along the route is a shut-off valve, as well as we have valves in between the pump stations, making sure that if there was an emergency, we can shut those valves and isolate sections, keeping the majority of the liquid in the pipeline. The valves we use are ball valves, typical what you'd see in your garden hose, just obviously a lot bigger, 42 inches versus smaller. And those are placed around populated areas, water sources, water crossings, municipal water intakes, everything with that, and along the route just to minimize outflow volumes as well. Our team went through and looked at over 2,000 water crossings, ranging from the St. Lawrence River to tiny unnamed streams that might only flow, 1 month out of the year during spring when it's melting. And what they did is they look at the entire pipeline route and they simulate a rupture every 20 feet. And so what they're doing is they're looking at exactly if they broke it at this section, how much oil can come out. One of the big differences between a natural gas pipeline and a liquid pipeline is, as you can see on the example, a liquid pipeline is slightly different in the sense of, with the curves and the undulations in the land, placing valves really comes down to strategically making sure it's in the best spot. So if you look on the example here, the X is where a break would occur. With how the land goes, the majority of the oil would stay in the pipeline. Once the initial pressure is off, our pump stations would shut down. Then once the pressure is gone, in the low areas is where you have the pool of oil collecting. And so you want to make sure your valves aren't placed at the bottom of a hill. You want to place them more at the top. And so if it were a rupture to occur, you would protect that area all the way down. And so that's what our team did, is they went through and simulated a break every 20 feet and looking at exactly how much oil could come out. And then we placed valves accordingly to make sure that that volume was reduced as much as possible. Some of the things we do as well with that is we want to make sure that we're prepared for the worst situation. And so we look at unrealistic examples to make sure that our emergency response is up to gear, as well as our valves. So three big things we look at when we simulate these breaking of the valves is we assume it's a full bore rupture. So we assume the pipe is completely cut in half and is completely opened, something that doesn't happen or wouldn't happen. So that's the first estimate we do. The second one is we assume that it's open air. And so instead of being in the ground or protected by the earth, we assume it's cut in the open air and everything in the pipe is going to get out. And the last one, we assume the pipeline is operating at the maximum design pressure of 1.25 million barrels a day. It'll never operate at that much, but we want to assume the absolute worst case scenario so we can make sure that our valves and our emergency response teams are in place. And so with that, we went through and we have actually added valves since our initial filing in 2014. And for a clearer picture and everything else, in our application filing with the NEB, and we'll send a link to that after this, you can look at the individual sections that have the roads and maps. But you can see at the top left, there's Pembroke, and so that's where our pumping station there. And then the bottom right's Stewartville by McNabb and Braeside. That's the other pump station. And then each of those little diamonds are emergency shutoff valve. And so on either side you can see 46.4 and 46.5. That's either side of the Bonnechere River, and then also throughout the other ones. And in our filing, if you want to take a detailed look, you can see exactly where those are and look at the topography of the land as well. And so this shows since 2014, we've added one extra valve in this area and moved the pump station a little bit as well. As far as local jobs, I'll go back here. One of the valve sites does fall within a Whitewater region, and that'll also bring additional tax revenues as well, and jobs to construct and build these as well. In addition to both pump stations need to be built. Right now, the natural gas system operates with compressor stations. For a liquid system, pump stations have to be built, and so you have one being built in Pembroke, and another one in Stewartville are the closest ones. And those are big jobs. Those are, million-dollar facilities that will require local work and efforts there as well. And that'll, as we get closer to construction, like I said, it's about 2018 till we expect the beginning of construction. Once we get closer to that, you'll see more opportunities for jobs and different applications come out for that as well. Since 2012, TransCanada has awarded $600 million in contracts to 550 Ontario companies. Where possible, we always try to hire locally. That's the best for where we operate, and it makes good neighbors out of everybody. And that's a practice that will continue with Energy East. Wherever possible, we will hire locally as we go along. I won't highlight too much on this, but just saying we've been out very early. I think this is my third or fourth meeting of this council. I was here with the previous one as well. We have 33 municipal resolutions of support. It's actually 34 now. We had one come in today of communities that support the idea of the pipeline for bringing jobs, for being the safest way to transport energy, as well as reducing rail traffic in a lot of cases as well. And you can read through kind of some of the other things we've done. We've had a lot of meetings, open houses. Just last December, we had a safety and emergency session where we invited first responders and public to come out to find out about our emergency and safety management and how we operate that. And that's something that now that we have the valves sited and the pump stations, that'll be the next step in the process, is really going down and meeting with first responders, building localized first responder plans with communities, making sure that if there ever was an accident, everyone knows exactly what to do and who to call, making sure we can respond as quickly as possible. And that's the presentation. I know I showed this last time. I included as well. This is an example of the pig that can go through the pipeline and kind of the readings it picks up. It can detect a scratch or a dent the size of your fingernail. So they are quite sophisticated. And that way we can go in and correct any problems well before they become an emergency situation as well. So that's it for this, for as far as the update and overview. I'm more than happy to take any questions if anyone has any as well.
Chair, I got a few questions. When you cross at the St. Lawrence, it's somewhere around Montreal you'll be crossing?
It's around Lévis, yeah.
Okay. Next question is going to be bitumen?
Yeah.
And is there a refinery in New Brunswick, or are they just shipping raw bitumen out of there?
No, so before it goes into our pipeline, it has to be treated. We have very specific regulations and rules of what we'll allow in our pipeline, including, the water content, the sand content. It has to be very, very cleaned in order to transport. We're not going to allow anything corrosive or anything that will damage our system to transport. Then it will go to the refineries. There's one in Quebec, or two in Quebec, sorry, and then the St. John, New Brunswick, Irving in New Brunswick.
Okay, and I got one. Is the pipes made in Canada?
Well, the pipe is in the ground here already.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. But the ones going through Quebec, would that be made by?
Where possible, we try to use Canadian. Because it's so big, there's not a lot of pipeline companies, frankly, that have the standards and qualifications we need. So I'm not sure exactly if it will all come from Canada or where it'll come from. So I don't know the answer as far as that goes.
Darryl? Councilor McLaughlin?
A couple of questions. How often do you do your inspections? Do you shut the pipeline down if you're going to run that through, John? How does that? Is there a schedule, like, do you do it so often?
Yeah, for sure. And so we don't have to shut down the pipeline for it to operate. Actually, what pushes the tool through is actually the liquid or the fluid or the oil, or the natural gas, depending on which one you're using. And every pump station it has a launcher and receiver. So we have a place to put it in securely, and so it can join the pipeline, and then a place to take it out. What we're doing is we'll work through a rotation schedule of where we do it. It's about every 2 years. But in certain areas, it is less, depending on, we've operated the pipeline here for the past 40 years. And so in areas where we know it's a little bit more maybe corrosive in the ground or anything like that, we'll run it more often in those places.
what pressure do you use to push the liquid? Is there a constant pressure, or does it fluctuate? Or?
Another difference between natural gas and oil is pipelines are built, one of the questions we get is if it's built for natural gas, is it safe to transport oil? Pipelines are constructed as far as pressure goes. And so whether it's oil or liquid or water, all of the pipes are hydrostatically tested before they're put into service, meaning we put water in at about 125% of the maximum pressure, making sure it's secure. Water is heavier than oil, so it doesn't matter what commodity is inside of it, it's more the pressure. And the natural gas system operates at about 1,000 psi. The oil system will operate the same. Where the difference is natural gas, because it's a gas, the whole thing will be pressurized to the same. Where with a liquid system, immediately following the pump station, it'll be at the highest pressure, and then as it travels, the pressure will go less and less until it gets to the next pump station, which will repressurize it to allow it to go to the next one.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you drop your pressure. That's why you have a pump station.
Yeah, exactly.
To increase it. How do you detect leaks, or is that with the pressure, or how's that done?
There's multiple ways to detect leaks. Okay. So one of the ones definitely is pressure. There's sensors along the entire pipeline that'll detect any pressure changes, and that will be known to our control center in Calgary right away. Another method is inflow and outflow. And so in a sealed system, whatever goes on this side, the exact same should be going to this side. And so whether there's a small leak or even a minor leak, we can detect between each pump station how much is going through, and if something isn't quite making it there. Temperature is another factor. If you have a sharp change in temperature, it could be a result of ground or something else coming in as well. And so there's multiple overlapping safety methods, making sure that we know exactly what's happening at any time with pressure, inflow and outflow, anything else, as well as our flybys.
So what you're telling me is you measure the flow from one pump station from one pump station to the next pump station?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Reeve Miller?
Yes, I was just curious on the map with the little purple safety valves there. Back a few. I'm just curious what warrants the big space only when we're going past Cobham, 10 miles west of Cobham or southwest, compared to the rest of the pipeline. We got something special going on here.
And this is where an engineer, if you have detailed questions, one of our engineers that looked at that. I know that we were in McNabb Braeside just a few weeks ago, actually. I'm not sure of that. The distance isn't that much. What I believe it was is, like I said, we looked at our outflow analysis, and so it might be a gentle slope down. There might be other factors as why the distance there. But I know that when we went through, we looked at every place, and if a valve would reduce the outflow, then we'd place it there. Whereas in some cases, a valve is there, and it wouldn't really impact that much if there was ever to be a rupture. But I'm not sure the answer. I'll find out exactly, and I'll get back to you.
I'm not sure you have something studied to say it's not a problem. It just stands out. It's about 2 times or over 2 times the distance. But
no,
I was
for
more
sure.
curious than anything.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that one.
Mayor Johnson?
It's almost the same question. You were saying that you were going to have valves on both sides of the water courses, or on one side of the water courses, and were you counting on static vacuum, if you will, to stop the flow from continuing when you shut a valve? So that's what you're using. Well, what you're using with your valve when you go like that, you shut a valve off, you've got a break here. What you're counting on is that will stay static because air can't get into it, right? And so I don't believe that, because I work in that kind of a system, and so you really should be having a valve on both sides of water systems.
Yeah. Well, even if you look at the Bonachera, like the BV464 and BV465, I don't know what the B stands for, but valve, that's on either side of the river. And so definitely on rivers where it makes sense. In some cases, if you have your river and it drops down sharply, it might not make sense to have it right on that other side and maybe put it down more. Or if there's other tributaries that go into it, it makes sense to put it on the other side of a tributary that goes in, so you're protecting the whole river system versus just the main river.
The reason I'm asking that, and Reeve Miller said the same thing, but I believe that Snake River line right under Snake River right there.
Okay.
And so it would be sensible to have one right there.
And that'll be one, I'll get our engineers that looked at the detail and be able to get a written exactly why it was there with a graphing kind of shows what a valve looks like as well.
Right.
Reeve Miller?
I'm sure this is all checked out, but that amazes me that we could get to this point. How would the M&R ever approve that pipeline through the Muskrat watershed and everything they got going with marshlands up there? There's a lot of questions there just out of curiosity. Is the process, maybe I missed it earlier, but
Sorry,
it does draw...
for the pipeline in service right now?
No,
or
just this plan that we're looking at.
Yeah.
I don't know at what stage you're at, but you're going right through some pretty sensitive lands. At least that's what the province is telling us. And we got less valves, so we're no matter what, like what Mayor Johnson said, no matter about the Snake River, we've got, if we went by what they want, we got a lot more valves to put in. I'm sure they'll want them, and I'm just curious as to why we wouldn't hear about that.
For sure, and one of the big things, and what might be useful is if the council would like it, having, you know, our technical team come and have a detailed explanation, because they do have the specifics on, here's the outflow, here's what it looks like, and we can definitely set that up if that's something that would be beneficial.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you.
That concludes the Public Works Committee. Now the planning.
Chair, no, he was gonna stay there. Whenever I move, you'll be here a lot longer. No, this is a discussion.
You're more important.
He's more important. I'll be back with my mom.
I make it.
Okay, so we'll open the planning committee meeting. The only thing on the agenda is OP 11 review and moving forward. Doesn't seem to be a very hot topic in our region, so we should be fine. Now if everybody has a copy of the package, there's 115 pages of this in our package, so I can't imagine everybody's gone through the details of it. So I think what we're looking for here is any questions. So what you have is a letter from JP2G to the CAO of Whitewater Region, and that was in response to a number of questions that council had at the last meeting where there was a review. And then there's a letter from the Ministry of Municipal Housing and Affairs to Mr. Cheeseman. And there's all sorts of stuff in the package, including a bylaw to adopt Amendment 11. Is that voices in my head? Or? Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we'll wait until you guys are done.
That's Karen's voice, isn't it? On helium. Let's watch a movie. I did. We need a 12-year-old boy. They're good at this stuff.
maybe now that the voices aren't going, we can talk to it. So as I was saying, there's a number of things in the package, including about 115 pages of about 10 different documents. So I think all we're here to do today is to discuss, or have an open discussion if there's anything that council has questions about. Obviously, there's no resolutions to pass tonight. This is simply another phase of trying to understand the OP and Amendment 11. So, any questions? Has everybody had a chance to read through the document? I take it no.
Memorized it.
Okay. Reeve Miller?
Okay, someone's got to say something about this. Pretty important, isn't it? You know, a year ago, well, actually about 15 months ago when I ran for Reeve, I got caught off guard at the Westmeath meeting of all candidates, and I got asked a question about my thoughts on the official plan. I didn't know anything about the official plan that night, and I passed the question off to Mr. Rathwell, and he answered it for me. He saved me that night. The very next morning, I came into this office, and I asked for a copy of Amendment 11. And I've been reading it and reading it and reading it for a year, and I've been asking questions to everybody for a year. And what I've learned is not anything about Amendment 11 and the official plan. It's the need for more training to this council, excuse the mic, in regard to how we interpret and administer any move to that. I feel very adamantly about that. My personal belief is that a lot has changed in 10 years since its inception. It's linked to water quality at Muskrat Lake by way of the Watershed Council and all the good people who went in there. I think that's great, but I have issues with the Watershed Council and the geography that it takes in now. It now covers the whole Indian River shed as well, and I would like council to look at what's going on in Muskoka and their watersheds and give this a real good look and slow it down. I'm prepared to have special meetings or whatever. I would like to see the committee brought back to life that was here long ago and have made up of very qualified people in our community that want to take an interest in this and have them resell this to this council before we make a decision that is very serious to our future, I think. And I think there's a lot of hidden meanings in signing something like this. I think there's a bunch of carrots offered to do it, but keep in mind, those carrots were stolen from us long ago. And they're not giving them all back, and that's just how I feel about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
I'm looking around and I'm looking for Brian Whitehead and Charles Cheeseman because I have a lot of questions and I expected them to be here to clarify any questions that council had. I simply say that without them here and without them being able to answer the questions, we might as well put it over to another day when they're available. Because I think there are a number of people that have questions, and I was certainly expecting them to be here to present, and not to present because they did present, but to be here available to us to answer any questions with regards to any changes that we may or may want to make. So I would ask that it be put over to another day.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mayor?
I think Reeve Miller is probably quite correct in a statement that council needs a lot more education, and I don't believe we're going to have the education unless we have the right people here. I agree with Councillor Jackson on that point. The idea of this meeting was for us to discuss a few items, and we have a quick realization, I think, that we need to ask questions to get clarification. I have also asked that somebody from the ministry at one of our meetings be here. We need, I think we need to be able to ask the Ontario government the questions at the same time as our planners. And so, respectfully, Chair, I would think maybe we should put this ahead through. We need to think more about it. I personally, and as Reeve Miller has said to me many times, this plan has a lot of really good things, but it has some things we need to change. And so being in a hurry is not what we have to be. Cautious is what we have to be. I think we can agree on that. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor McLaughlin?
Well, just like everybody else around this table, I totally agree with what the mayor has to say. We need to know what we're looking at, know what it is, get better educated, and answer the questions. That's the only way you'll get educated. So I have to agree with everybody else. I had thoughts of handing it to another unbiased company to look at it and come back with comments, but I'm willing to wait on that if we want to get our answers, these answers answered, that we had the questions that we have, if we want to do that. But we want to make sure that we know exactly what, because I've heard before somebody slipped one by us. I don't want that to happen to this council. So I think even if we have to spend more money to get another partner in on this, I want to make sure that when I raise my hand and be in favor, I know what I'm talking about and I understand it. And for me to read this right now, I don't totally understand it. I don't know if there's somebody around the table that does, well, more power, because there's a lot of stuff in there and there's a lot of hidden little parts that need to be answered. So I'm agree with everybody else. Let's just take it easy, get our questions answered, and then move forward.
Thank you. Reeve?
I would support Councillor McLaughlin on everything he said and encourage council, as hard as it is, to move on, like Councillor McLaughlin said, to somebody independent. We have to keep in mind the people we're paying to do this are also representing the county. They're also representing private enterprise. They're also representing the Aboriginal groups, which seemingly have a say in our watershed council. And now I'm hearing our sewer plant expansion. We've got to really look at all that and get an outside assessment, no matter what it costs us, to be clear to move forward with this, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Rieger or Mackay, you guys are good?
I think that's a good idea. Have somebody else to explain it to us.
Just, some closing comments. As chair, it's my personal feeling that I agree with everybody at the table. And I do agree that we need some outside assessment as well. But I also think it's incumbent on each one of us that if we're studying for a test or exam, this is the one we need to ace. This is the single biggest decision that this council will make in its 4-year term. The implications of this official plan and the Amendment 11 will set the course for the next 50 to 100 years in our community. So I really think that while we do get some advice from outside legal counsel and some groups, I think it's incumbent on each one of us to understand as much as they can about this OP and Amendment 11 as well. Okay, so I think we'll put it off. And Mr. Schultz?
Yeah, Chris, I'm just looking for some direction then from council. Do you want us to look at somebody to come in and help us, a private, like another firm, to help us review it, or what direction you're going to give?
I think personally, I think it needs to be a third party, so somebody other than JP2G, who we do work very closely with. Yeah. So I'd like advice from a completely different group. Maybe somebody that does have some history already in other counties or regions. Okay, I'm gonna go to, Councillor McLaughlin, who was up first.
I would personally like to get the questions answered from JP2G and Charles Cheeseman first before we move further. You know, I'd like to have those answered, and then at that point, if we still feel we need to get a third party, and then at that point, we would, but right now, I don't think I'm in favor of looking for a third party quite yet.
Mayor, you were up next.
I was just thinking that possibly a panel from someplace like Mississippi Mills that is on staff or even they have a lot of issues there that we might have here because of their amount of land and streams. I do agree, though, we better go back to our people first to clarify it, because what I'm reviewing right here again, and you read it over and over and over, like we're getting some really great things in this. We just have to verify that they are great, and then we've got to go forward.
Councillor Jackson?
I agree that with Councillor McLaughlin that we need the time to have the questions answered first, and then I'd like to know how much it's going to cost to have somebody else review it prior to making that decision whether or not we want them to review it or not. I think answer the questions first, and then and again with Councillor McLaughlin, if we're not satisfied with some of the answers or we want further clarification, then perhaps bring somebody in that can answer those questions for us.
Thank you. I think Reeve, you had your hand up, or were you good? Okay. Yeah.
So I'll relay to the CAO that we will invite Mr. Cheeseman and Mr. Whitehead back to answer any questions, and I'll wait to speak with her to see what the next available option is for a meeting. Okay.
I think it's important, Reeve, you're up next. I think it's important that for instance, I've dealt with 3 different lawyers on a subject recently, and all 3 lawyers had a different interpretation of the exact same law. So I think it's important that, you know, whether it be JP2G, what they're interpreting is what the minister is also interpreting as the same. So I think we need clarification that everybody's on the same page here.
Did you say that?
Yep.
I would agree totally with that. We learned all about that today in other ways. I would like to move ahead with some kind of a direction to go ahead and form a committee. How would I go about that, and will you all support it? So we can start having other people, other locals working on this and presenting it. It will cut down on our load if we have smart people coaching us from a committee, a local committee.
So would it be an official planning committee, an ad hoc committee? And I think that would...
steering committee. Advising council to their findings.
I think ad hoc committees, if I'm not mistaken, are at the discretion of the mayor.
They can be. They can be requested by council, and I believe an ad hoc committee. The mayor, I think the mayor can appoint, but it has to be
approved by
council. And it would, if I have to. If I'm going to be the one that's appointing, then I need also, I feel very important that I need involvement of council to direct who they feel. And the next thing is what size of council we look, or committee we looking at.
Okay. Councillor Jackson?
I think if we went to that, I think let's get our answers first, and then if we need further clarification or further help, then perhaps we can look out. And if we are looking at a steering committee or an ad hoc committee, that it be a broad spectrum, and that it's not just localized from one area, that it be across Whitewater region, because this official plan is across Whitewater region, and I've only ever heard of some people from around here directly rather than across the whole region. So I want to hear from everybody if that we're going to have any kind of an ad hoc committee. That's what I would agree to.
Okay. Councillor Rieger, you're up.
Actually, that's exactly what I was going to say, and I would support Councillor Jackson on that 100%.
Reeve?
I do as well. If I could make a suggestion to all of us on council, if we all could come up with a name or two from a different geography, here are a bunch of names, and approach these people and see if we can put together just that, like across the geography of the township.
So have we haven't decided whether we're gonna go ahead with the committee yet, right?
We're gonna get the answers. That was what I understood. We get the answers, then we move forward with, if we feel at that point that we just need a closer result. I was hearing that we would get this, go first, step one is get clarification. After the clarification, if we have too many issues, that we would ask for a price to send it out, and number three, we would then do an ad hoc committee. That was what I was hearing, and is that what everybody was hearing?
I'd like it in the other way, to get the advice back, Mr. Cheeseman.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
but I think an ad hoc committee, I think that's better than actually sending something out. It's localized, it's people interested in our own township. I think, I personally like the sound of having a committee formed, of however many people it takes from different regions.
Instead of putting it out.
Yeah, first.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and then I think based on the advice or the input from your ad hoc committee, then we would send it out for interpretation, whether we're interpreting it properly.
No, we needed that.
Yep, Councillor Jackson.
I don't know if some people are aware of the fact that there was an ad hoc committee previously, and I'd like to know why that was stopped or whatever. Because I understand that they were involved at some point, and then they were asked not to be involved any further. So I don't want to delay the process. I think there's been a number of dollars spent with regards to this official plan. It's taken 10 years in the making to get to this point. I don't want it to take 10 years again. I think once we get our answers, if we need further clarification, or if those people come forward and ask for further clarification, they can bring those questions to council, and or they can directly ask Mr. Whitehead and Mr. Cheeseman. But I don't want to go down rewriting the whole official plan again. So I hesitate to go to a committee because I don't want to go through it line by line by line. We've identified a number of issues, and I would encourage everybody to read it and understand it, and ask those people that sat on the committee before questions and whatnot, so that you better educate yourself, or if you have any other means of getting answers. I've asked a number of questions. I've asked a planner that I know, and I've gotten further clarification, but there are still some questions that I need to ask Mr. Cheeseman and Mr. Whitehead. I don't know that I need an extra committee to do that. I would say we ask our questions first and then even decide on whether or not we need a committee or not.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we've determined, right? Invite Mr. Whitehead, Mr. Cheeseman back so we can ask them questions, get clarification. If we need to, step two would be to form a committee after that fact. Mayor?
I think also we would be doing the proper thing if we were to, as a council, when we feel we have it fully understood, to have the people that know inside out to explain to the public one-on-one with like a councillor and an expert, i.e. the I-call or whatever, for an evening, so that people can come in with the maps and all of that, and ask questions, and have that as a public meeting, a public forum, before we do any passing of anything. I feel kind of strongly about that. That gives people then to ask the questions that we don't think of. It gets them to, we should be able to, if we do our homework correctly, explain the different things that have been proposed and how they will affect. And we also need to be closer to the official Rutherford County plan before we get to that point, because we will have to know how everything correlates with everything else. Step 1 right through step 10, as I keep saying. And so.
Okay. Councillor McLaughlin?
Well, I hear around here, I think we go to the next step, get our questions answered, and at that point, let's have a discussion after that where we're gonna move. But right for now, I want my questions answered, the concerns that I have, get them done, and then at that point, I'll decide what I feel we should go. And that's where I think we should head.
Okay, Mr. Schultz?
I just would, maybe suggest that if council has any questions, that they can be forwarded to Christine, that Christine or someone can transfer them to Brian Whitehead and Charles Cheeseman, that they can speed up the process, that they can start working on your questions, for the next meeting when they come.
Yeah, so we don't wanna blindside them, right?
Yeah. So, if everybody wants to send their questions to Hope, she'll consolidate all the questions and, prepare that for Mr. Cheeseman. Okay? On that note, we'll end the discussion there. Get your questions ready, and we'll invite Mr. Cheeseman and Mr. Whitehead to another meeting.